everyone. I hope that you watched my last video, which showed you how to export data out of Qualtrics for those of you who did surveys. So this video is going to be me showing you sort of how the data transports into an Excel document, where and how it's sort of laid out, how you can sort of clean up your data, and then how you can go about taking the data that you have and then trying to interpret it or extrapolate meaningful conclusions from it. If you watched that last video, the sheet that I downloaded from my finished survey is essentially what you're seeing on the screen now. So a few things of note, let me just tell you how this is organized first. So first of all, each of the columns represents a different set of data, right? So a lot of this in the beginning here looks like crazy data that you didn't even ask for, and that's because you did not ask for this data, but it is data that is recorded by Qualtrics anyway, such as the start and end date, of the person who took your survey, also, IP address, the progress, duration, whether or not they finished the survey, etc. So a lot of this front matter here is going to be deleted when you finish up your data. For most of you, and in most instances of taking surveys, a lot of this information is inconsequential to the research that you're doing, and therefore you don't need it. There is a possibility from time to time that certain data might be of this sort might be consequential, but that's going to be on a case-to-case basis and probably fairly rare. Okay. The one thing that is, in my eyes, fairly useful from this, though, is this progress or this finished function. The progress here basically notes whether or not, and the same is true of the finished here, whether or not someone completed your survey through the end. Okay. So if it doesn't say 100, if it has something less than 100, like 50 or 75, those represent the percentage of your survey that was completed. Now, you as the researcher need to decide what you're going to do with any incomplete or partial data. A lot of the times, those respondents don't end up getting included in the data. But again, that's going to be sort of up to individual researchers. What I'm going to ask you to do, though, for this class is that you do not include incomplete data. So what would happen then is for anyone who has less than 100, or if it says false over here under whether or not they completed the survey, what you will do is you will highlight and then delete each of those entries that is incomplete. But before you delete them, what I would recommend you do is copy and then create a sheet of incomplete data. So just so that way you have your whole data set at some point. Okay, so what I'm going to do is recommend then that you start a new sheet in your Excel workbook. Right now we just have one sheet, but using this little plus sign down at the bottom here, I can create an additional sheet in my workbook. Now it looks like all my data's gone away, but that's not true, right? I've just created another sheet in my workbook. I can still toggle back over here to my original data set. Okay, so you can see how you can toggle back and forth. Now over here, I'm going to label this new sheet so that way it's organized and I know what's in this sheet. And if I come back to it, I know what I'm looking at. So I'm going to say incomplete data. Okay, I'm going to hit enter and then it locks that name in. I'm going to toggle back to my thing here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that this entry is incomplete. So what I would do is now that I've hit over here, you can use where it says A through infinity letters, depending on how far over you scroll. And then there's like this column over here that says like 1 through, again, infinity numbers. Okay. So I'm going to click on the number over here. This is the row that I want to want to copy and then delete. So I'm going to, once I've hit this, it highlights the entirety of that entry. So I'm going to click Command C on my Mac, or if you're a PC user, do whatever the equivalent of a right click on a mouse is. And then you'll click copy. After I've done that, I'm going to navigate over to this new sheet that I've created. I'm going to click in this first box here, and I'm going to click Command V, or the equivalent of a right click, and then just press on paste. And then it's going to put that data here for me. Okay. After that, I would go back to this sheet, and then I would right click, Command, and then Command, or excuse me, and then just hit delete. Of course, this is complete though, so I'm not going to delete this line. Okay. Also keep in mind that if you use the survey preview function to take your own survey, to test it out, to make sure that the flow was correct or something like that, it will say survey preview here in the status or response type. So that is actually another useful function if you previewed your survey and completed it a couple times to check it out. That survey data can also be deleted, okay? Because you don't want to include that. That's not real data. That was just me, for example, in the preview of the survey, clicking through and making sure that all of my questions went through in the progression that I wanted them to go through. Okay, so here I'm going to drag across these two responses over on the side here using the numbers. I'm going to drag across 4 and 5 because those are my survey previews. And then I'm going to do the equivalent of a right click, and I'm going to delete those responses. Okay. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, up at the top here, these first 3 rows, I'm going to highlight them for you so you can kind of see. These are all headers. Okay. So, if we scroll over to where like the actual data of the survey that collected answers to the questions you actually asked are, you'll notice this top one, it just labels your questions alphanumerically. So it's like Q2, Q2, 3, Q3, Q4, Q5, et cetera, et cetera. That's not really useful. And then you'll notice on the third line here, it just says like import ID, blah, 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 all the way across. That's also not really useful. The only one you really need is this second line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this first one, and I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to click the third one and delete that. I'm going to do it at the same time though. So I clicked the 3. If I'm on a Mac, which I am, I'm going to click Command, hold it down, and then press this second one, and then you'll see that both of them are highlighted. If you are on a PC, I'm fairly certain that you would hit Control or hold down Control and hit the secondary line to highlight them both at the same time. But don't quote me on that because I don't use PC very often. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go on either one of them, and I'm going to do the equivalent of a right click, and then I'm going to delete. Okay. So this is like me starting to clean up my data. Okay. So now I just have one header line, and now I've deleted my, any incomplete data. I've deleted any, of the preview results, meaning I was the only one who, meaning I was the one who filled them out for those preview results, right? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is each of these, each of the rows, let me just explain, each of the rows here now represents, with the exception of the header, each of the rows represents one person's data who completed my survey. Okay. But you'll notice that we still have a bunch of information up front here that we really don't need. So what I'm going to do is for column A all the way over to Q, and I believe this should be true for all of you as well. So A through Q, but double check just to make sure that you're not cutting off any of the data that you actually need. But after I've dragged all the way across here and highlighted these, I'm going to delete them. So I'm going to control click, or again, the equivalent of a right click, and delete. Okay, so now all I have left then is the actual data that I need, that I asked for, of my of my respondents. So I'm going to show you how to do a few things with this. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how to work with your demographic data. And one of the things that you'll probably want to tell your audience in the process of writing your paper is to tell your audience some of the demographic data and break it down in percentages. What percentage of people were male versus female versus some portion of other. If I asked for ages, which I did, what percentage of people were in different age demographics, excuse me. If you collected household income data, if you collected data about race, if you collected data about education level, etc., which hopefully you all did, because the more demographic data you can do, the better. This was just a sample survey, so I only included 2 questions of demographic data, but really in a real survey, you want it to be much more robust than that. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to work with each of these individually first. So here, my first demographic question, you'll see here, please choose the gender identity that you identify as. So the choices I gave them were male, female, other, and also that they could choose not to answer. All the sample things that I filled out, though, I just chose male, female, or other. For the other, they were able to identify what that other was, though. So for that question, I actually have 2 rows of data, and that's going to be true of any that you put other and then allowed them to put in their preferred answer. Okay, so if they chose other, they would be able to input whatever they meant by other. Okay, so I'm going to take these two columns that represent that gender data, and I'm going to drag across. So now it's A and B, and I'm going to copy, and I just hit Command C, but if do a right click basically and then scroll down to copy. I'm going to create a new sheet in my workbook like I did for the incomplete data. I'm going to name it. So if you double click, it should allow it to be editable then. And I'm going to put gender data. Okay. Press enter to lock that in. And then I'm going to click in this first corner button over here, and I'm going to Command V, Control V if you're on a PC, or you can right click and hit paste. So now I have all of my data in here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort this data so that way all of my similar answers are together. So all of my female answers are together, all my male, etc. So I'm going to take these 2 data points and I'm going to create a sort. So if you're in your home section here, you're going to scroll over to where it says sort and filter. I'm going to click this. I'm going to do a custom sort. Now, it already has one section here for me, sort by. Now, right now, if I click sort by, it's going to say column A or column B, but my information has headers up at the top. So I don't really want them to count this first row as data because that's really a header. So up here, there should be some sort of, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, it might look a little different, but it should have something to the effect of my list has headers, and you'll make sure that that is clicked. So that way it's not including that data. You'll notice that it unhighlighted or unselected these first couple of boxes now that it knows it's a header. Okay. So first I'm going to do, so now that I did that, I'm going to click sort by, and it says, please choose that I enter the identity that you identify as, select. So I'm going to do that. And then I want that to go in the order of A through Z. So it'll be like female, male, other, right? So then I want to also include this though, because I allowed them to choose an other option, and the two people that I had who did other options have different gender identities. One identifies as non-binary, one is gender fluid. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an additional layer of sorting. Okay, so I'm going to click the plus sign here, and then so first it's going to sort by that first column, okay? But then after those are in alphabetical order, the secondary thing that it's going to take into account to order those other things is the secondary column. So then by, and I'm going to choose this secondary option, then by other, and also A through Z. Okay, so now after I click OK, it's going to rearrange my data over here. Now keep in mind when you're rearranging data like this, if you don't have like that one specific data in its own sheet. So say I was in my master sheet and I had all that other data still attached to it, you'll want to make sure that you still select all that data to make sure that it is rearranged with this. Okay, if I only have this selected, but I have a bunch of data over here, it's going to basically divorce that other data from these answers. So if I want to know later on what my males said about certain things, what my females said about certain things, etc., that data is now going to be messed up and be disassociated from the original person and the answers that were provided together, okay, which you don't want to do, okay? So that's why it's really good to have the additional sheets and to sort of divvy out information as you're working with those specific pieces. Okay, so now I'm going to click OK to sort of show you how it's going to sort. And here you go, like magic. I'm going to kind of make this a little bigger for you. You can kind of see that these have been sorted then alphabetically. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to make it easy for me to count. So what I'm going to do is you'll notice here that I have several female answers, right? So now I'm going to go through and I'm just going to basically count. Now, notice, though, that I'm going to highlight them. So I'm going to highlight all my females. Okay. So now that they're highlighted, now I could go through and I could just be like 1, 2, 3 and just count manually. But if I highlight like this, as I highlight, down somewhere at the bottom of your Excel screen, there should be something that says count. Okay, so here I'm counting and I've come out and I have 10 females highlighted. So now I know I have 10 females who took my survey. Okay, now I'm going to do males. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drag across and check my count and it says 11. So now I have 11 males. Okay, actually I should probably do this one over. I apologize because this is technically my other data set, right, from the other, okay? So I'm going to do 10, and I'm going to move this 11 over here. So be careful about that, and I apologize for that mess up. Okay, but then now I have someone who identifies as gender fluid. I have 1. I have someone who identifies as non-binary, 1. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I want to visualize this data, okay? You don't have to visualize the data. If you want to do the calculations yourself or whatever, you could take the number of respondents, which in this case is 10 plus 11 plus 1 plus 1, or I can just highlight this row and it will give me the count. There's a sum of 23, so 23 people responded to my survey. You could divide, right? 10 divided by 23 and figure out what that percentage is, 11 divided by 23, 1 divided by 23, etc. But really, I'm just going to visualize it. I'm going to make it easier. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go to my insert function in Excel. And somewhere in there, you should have a little menu that has graphs and data visualization options. So there are several options available. There's line charts, bar charts, pie charts, etc. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these data points. So where I have female, 10, other, blah, 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 I'm going to create a little additional side thing that just sort of sums up that information. So I'm going to say female, 10, male, 11, gender fluid, 1, and non-binary, 1. Okay. Now that I've done this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this little summation of that data. And I'm going to turn this into a pie chart. So I'm going to come over here to this pie chart function. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to choose the kind of pie chart that I'd like. I am going to do just this 3D pie chart. So I'm going to click that, and then you'll notice it has turned that information into a pie chart for me. It has a key down here. Okay. So that's cool. You can change the colors around if you want and use like a different, arrangement or whatever if you'd like to do that. I'm not that invested at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it as is. But you can see that there's a little key at the bottom and all of that. I am going to, add data labels. So there we go. So the reason I did add data labels is because now they can see the number attached to it. So now they know there are 11 of the orange, which we go down to the key, is the males, so 11 males. This gray is the gender fluid, the yellow, 1 non-binary, and 10 is associated with the blue, which is female. Okay. But see, this is a nice data visualization. So if you have like certain data that you think is going to be powerful for your audience to actually see, now this might be more appropriate for other data that you've collected within the confines of your survey that has more to do with your topic area rather than your demographics, in terms of, at least in terms of the visualizations, right? You can just provide the percentages instead. And you'll notice too here when I scroll over each of these data points that in that little black box, it does actually give you the percentage. So it'll say value 11, 48%, for example. If I go over to the female side, value 10, there's 10 females, 43% of my data, right? So this is a nice little way to visualize data that you might have. Now, again, this is probably going to be better suited, or these visualizations in particular will be better suited for data that has to do with your actual research topic. So if you were, looking at smartphone usage like I did for this fake survey, then I might do something like this in relation to some other data point, like how many times a day do you use your smartphone? And then, whatever the breakdown of people, I probably gave them choices like 0, 1 to 5, 8 to 10, 1 to 5, 6 to 11, 12 to 15, or whatever the breakdown might be. And then it will break it down by, the areas. Of course, you'll have to do like all the same kind of organization and all that to get those data points. But then once you have your data points, you can turn it into a chart like this. The thing that's nice about this is after you have turned your data into a visualization like this, you can actually save the chart. So basically do a right click or the equivalent of it, and you can, excuse me, make sure you're kind of like on the thing here. And what you can do is, make sure you're not directly on the image. Make sure you're kind of in the white part. That was my trouble. But you're going to save this as a photo, basically. So it says save as picture as one of the options, or depending on the computer you're on, it might have something slightly different. It might be like save as image or JPEG or something. I don't know. But it should say something along those lines. So I'm going to save as picture. It's going to pop up your Finder window or your files, and you can figure out where you want to save it. Make sure you save it somewhere that you can find it. preferably, hopefully, you have a folder that already has all your research materials for this project in it, so you could save it there. Make sure you give it a name. So here I might do something like gender breakdown or something along those lines, just so I know what the picture is. At that point, you'll hit save. I'm not going to save it right now because this isn't actual data that I need for anything per se. So I'm going to say cancel. But you can use these then visualizations in your actual paper as long as you have that image file saved. So you can, as you're writing your paper in Word or whatever format that you're, or whatever program, you're using to do your writing, you can import that image into there, or perhaps even drag and drop it from your files window. Okay. So the other fun part about this then is looking at the actual data that you wanted to collect other than demographics. I am going to take a look then at so the first major question I asked was, do you have access to a smartphone, right? Those who said no did not complete the rest of the data. So it looks like impartial data. But remember from when I created this faux survey, like a couple of videos ago when I was teaching you how to do Qualtrics, one of the things that I implemented into the survey was this question, and if they answered no, they don't have access to a smartphone, I had the survey end for them there. So for them, they did complete 100% of the survey that they could, because I made it to where they could not complete any more of the survey if they answered that they did not have access to a smartphone, because of course that would be silly for them to complete the rest of the survey if they can't give me meaningful data about smartphone usage because they don't have access to one. Okay, so I'm going to visually do a visualization of this question's data. Okay, so I'm going to, this one is one column only. So I'm going to highlight this column. I'm going to do Command C or the copy function. I'm going to create another sheet. My new sheet, I'm going to call it smartphone access. I'm going to paste Command V. And much like when I was doing my demographic data with the gender question, I'm going to do kind of the same thing. I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to sort my data, sort and filter. I'm going to just sort A through Z though, because I don't have a secondary column in this one where they could have chosen other. So I only need to do that first A to Z. So I'm going to do A to Z. So all my no's are together, all my yeses are together. And then I'm going to count. So my no's, I'm going to come down to my count function, 6. So 6 people did not have access to a smartphone. And then there were 17 people who did. Okay, so now I'm going to create a little graphic here and say no and yes, and I'm going to put the values 6 and 17. And I can do sort of the same thing as I did before, but I'm going to do it different. I'm going to do a bar chart or something instead this time. So once I have my data highlighted, I'm going to go over to my insert function, find my graphs. I'm going to do a bar chart this time. So I'm going to do, I'm going to do the 3D one from the side, because why not? And I'm going to plug in my computer because apparently it's about to die. So now you'll see that it has, much like it did with the pie chart, created a visualization of my data. So you can see essentially how many people said yes, which is 17, and it kind of shows it down here. And no was 6, so just a little over the 5 mark there. Okay, and you can do the same thing with this, right? So just do a right click, save as picture, etc., like you did the other one. Okay. But you can tell here, and this is where you can start looking at your data, right? So I noticed here that a vast majority of the people who did my survey do have access to a smartphone. Okay. So The next thing that you might want to do is maybe I'm a little bit curious about this demographic that does not have a smartphone. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, maybe I'm curious about what the demographics are. Maybe if I can see if there's something in common or something like that. So I'm going to do a new sheet. And in this, I'm going to say smartphone, I'm going to smartphone access by demographic. Okay. So I am going to bring in a couple of data points into this sheet. First, I'm going to go over to my main data source, and I am going to pull, maybe I'm interested to know how many people did or didn't have smartphones based on age. Okay, so I'm going to take my age demographic question, Command C, or copy rather, and I'm going to go back to that sheet I just started, and I'm going to paste this in. Now I'm going to go back over, and I'm also going to pull that data about whether or not they have access to a smartphone. So I'm going to do Command C, and I'm going to click over in column B here and paste that in. Okay, so now I have the age ranges that were selected, and also the answer or response I gave about whether or not they have access to a smartphone. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to try and visualize, I'm going to try to make I'm going to try and find out who of these demographics did or didn't, see if there's anything interesting about who did or didn't have a smartphone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these two data points. And I am going to go over to my sort function. Now remember, we have two data sets here, right? We have the age set and we have the whether or not they have access to a smartphone. So I'm going to do a custom sort. So much like when we were doing the gender one, we have two levels of to sort here. So I have all of that selected. So first I'm going to make sure it knows that my thing has headers. So it's deselected these first two, this first row basically. So first I'm going to sort by, I'm going to sort by age range, and do, instead of A through Z, I'm going to do custom. Oops. I'm going to do values. Actually, I am just going to do the A through Z. I'm hoping because it's numbers that it's just going to sort like I think it's going to, which is by numerical value. But we will see in a moment. I'm going to click the plus sign so that way I can add that extra level of sort. So that like basically if anyone who answered the same over here, so if I have like a bunch of 16 to 25-year-olds, it will then be sorted by whether they said yes or no. So what I'm going to do here is then sort by, do you have access to a smartphone, value A through Z. Okay, so I'm going to say okay. So what we see here is that, so 16 to 25, all of them had a smartphone. 26 through 35, all of them. 36 through 45, all of them had a smartphone. 56 plus, wow, we have some here that don't have access to a smartphone. 56 plus, there is 1, 2, 3, so about half of the 56 plus crowd did have a smartphone, half of them did not. And the same is true for my under 16 crowd, okay? So what we can extrapolate from this is like the older you get, the access to a smartphone or whatever becomes more spotty. And of course, under 16 also is a little bit more spotty. So what are some things that we could extrapolate from this data? Well, we might say, now keep in mind, you want to hedge your bets, right? Or hedge kind of what you say. You don't want to talk in exactitudes, right? I don't know if that's actually a word, but I'm going to say it is. You don't want to talk in a way that makes it seem like this is absolutely true, right? What you can discern from this, you can take an educated guess about what this might mean, right? So you could say something along the lines of, based on the fact that only half of the respondents who were 56 plus had access to a smartphone. There could be arguments to be made that either there are a variety of reasons this could be, right? We don't know exactly what the circumstances are, right? But we might say something like, well, perhaps older people just don't feel the need for that level of technology. Maybe at 56 plus, maybe they're getting older in age and starting to rely on Social Security and don't have as much income perhaps as they used to have, and therefore they just can't afford a luxury like a smartphone. There could be a variety of factors here that come into play. The other thing is you could look at the under 16 crowd, and it might be some similar problems in terms of monetary, right? So if you're under 16, you may or may not have the money to get a smartphone, or perhaps you have parents that don't think that they want you to have a smartphone. So you could add those as possible factors, right? But you have to say they're possible because we don't have the exact data, or nor did we ask them specifically in our survey why they don't have a smartphone if they don't have one, right? So here we can give an educated guess or provide possible scenarios, but you need to make sure that you're clear with your audience that those are just possibilities. Maybe this is why. So don't try and give any sort of hard and fast information that makes it seem like why someone didn't have a smartphone when you really don't. Okay, so you can't add context to your answers that aren't there. If you want to sort of hypothesize about why certain populations may or may not have had a smartphone in this case, you need to make sure that you're clear with your audience that these are basically educated guesses. They are not based in your findings per se, right? So you could look at that. Now, another way you could break this down, you might look at other demographic data alongside this. So like if you wanted to have like 3 columns, maybe you would look at, of course I didn't collect this in my fake survey, but if I had, for example, household income information, maybe I would find that these older individuals that don't have smartphones have less money, and maybe the same true of these 16-year-olds. Maybe their families are from, backgrounds that are not as well off. Okay. Of course, I don't have that data right here to make those claims, but you guys hopefully collected far more demographic data than in this fake survey that I created. But you could sort of go through and do those sort of same steps. Okay, so another fun part of survey data is cleaning up your survey data. Sometimes when you import your data into Excel, it does weird things. So like you'll notice here, these were questions about how many times per week do you use the following apps. Now, hopefully you guys watched the video where I put this together and the answers were like 0 or 1 through 3, 4 through 6. 7 through 9, etc. So what it has done is sometimes Excel does funky things, and here it has turned those into dates. So everywhere where I put that the answer should have been 3 to 6, it has interpreted that as a date as March 6th. And the same is true of any of them that had similar-ish or could be interpreted as dates. So where it says 9 June, really this was supposed to be 6 to 9 or 15 December. It's interpreting that as the 15th of December, but really it should have been 12 through 15. Okay, so here, this is an instance where I need to clean up my data even further. So to make this useful to me, what I would then need to do is go through, and anywhere where that it says like 6 March, for example, I'm going to have to change that. I'm going to go 3 and then use the word 2 because the dash is what kind of made it look like it was supposed to be a date. So I'm going to go 3 the letter two, or the word two, T-O, and then the number 6. And I'm going to have to do that everywhere. So I'm going to copy and paste this cell, Command C, and then I'm going to Command V or paste it over any of the 6-MAR answers. Okay. Now I'm not going to do this ad nauseum for all of this, right? But you're going to have to do that for each of the ones that turned into a date, or at least I will. And if you had data that was similar, you're going to have to do the same. Okay, so here, this one's supposed to be 6 to 9. Here I'm going to do, that's the same, 6 to 9. I'm just going to do this first row so we can work a little bit with this data. But then, 12, TO, 15. And then I'm going to just sort of leave the rest of this for now. I just want to kind of show you how to use some of these, this data set. So then it's going to be 12 to 15. Thankfully, it's auto-populating a little bit for me. So this is supposed to be 1, 2, 3. And this one is supposed to be 12 to 15. Perfect. Okay. So based on the question up here, this first one was supposed to be how many times per week do you use the following app? The first one was Facebook, right? So I'm going to take this data and I'm going to also bring over my age stuff. So I'm going to do Facebook by age. Okay. So I'm going to paste, oops, that's not quite right. I did not copy my data. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to copy the data for that question. So Command C, and I'm going to come over here, Facebook by age, Command V, and then I'm going to come over here, and I'm also going to pull my age data again. Okay, Command C, and let's see, do Facebook by age again. Okay, so then I'm going to come over to column B and insert that. So what I'm going to try and do is, I think I'm actually going to organize this first by age and then by occurrences. So I'm going to highlight my data again. I'm going to sort it. I'm going to do a custom sort since I have 2 data points. My list has headers, is already checked, so that's good. Make sure it is. I'm going to first sort by age range, A through Z. Then I'm going to add an additional layer. So then I'm going to sort by the occurrences or the number of times per week they use Facebook. Also A through Z. And I'm going to hit OK. So it rearranges my data. So here we can kind of look and see if there is any data to suggest how this usage is done. So here I'm seeing that my 56 plus crowd does not seem to use Facebook at all. And my 16 and under crowd doesn't use it very much either. But if you get into here to the like mid-range, they use it quite a bit more. So here you could also extrapolate some data. You know, older people use Facebook either not at all or very little, because like even up here in the 45 range, they aren't using those like top tier numbers like 12, 15, 18 plus, blah, blah, blah. They're using it a lot less than those younger demographics. But then also under 16 doesn't use Facebook very often in this fake survey, right? So what we could take from this is say Facebook among older crowds is used very little, if at all. We could also say that the under 16 crowd uses it very little as well. So here you could then again, hypothesize about why that might be, and perhaps you've done other research that might also suggest some ideas about why this is, or why you're seeing the sort of trends in data that you are. But here it might just be like older individuals are just on social media less, right? It's not something that they grew up around. It's not something that's sort of native to their experience. So it's reasonable to surmise that it's just not something they're that into. Whereas the younger crowd, Facebook is kind of an older social media site. So the younger crowd might be trending towards a different app, right? And you might notice after you get some of your other, or do some other comparisons, or like if I were to do some other comparisons in my data, I might find that like Instagram was used by, the 30 to whatever crowd, or younger crowds, or, TikTok maybe is used among, my under 16 crowd and my 16 through 25 crowd the most or something, right? It's a newer social media site, so maybe it just is, a trend with younger people, and older people just aren't as into that, right? So you can kind of start to sort of interpret some of your data and try and understand, based on some of the demographics who answered in specific ways, see if there are any trends there. So we did see some trends here. Other things, you might not find any trends that seem meaningful, right? So that's kind of how you can take that. The other thing that you can do here, though, is if I wanted to, I'm going to do just Facebook data. So I'm going to take this Facebook, and I'm just going to break down, let's see, so then I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to go to this one since it's what I need anyway. So how many times a week do you use the app? Command C, Facebook, Command V. And here I can just visualize this data, okay? So I'm going to do this, and I am going to sort my data. Sort A to Z. Now I just have the one, so I'm just doing it outright. Now, keep in mind here, though, there are several blanks over here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are 4 people that don't have access to a smartphone. So you need to decide how you're going to treat those pieces of data. Are you just going to turn these into zeros, for example? That's what I would probably do, considering, what my fake survey is looking at. But you'll have to decide if you have similar instances in your survey where people were cut off from answering. Just make sure that you're clear with your readers how you treated the data in those circumstances. Okay, so now that I have done that, I'm going to resort. Okay, so I'm going to do, I have no idea what that pop-up was. I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen since this is fake data anyway. So I'm going to sort. You can also right click and find sort here too. I have been using the option in the header, but you can do it this way as well. So I just resorted it. So now I can go through and just count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. Actually, I'm going to just go over to my count. So 9 people do not use Facebook at all. Okay. I have 1 person who does 1 to 3 times a week, and two people who do 12 to 15, 2 people who do 15 to 18, 18 plus times a week. 3 to 6 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so here I'm going to create my data set again, right? So 0 was 9 people. 1 to 3 was 1 person. 12 to 15 is 2 people. And, oops, see, look, this is why. 12 to 15 is 2 people. Excuse me. 15 to 18 is 2 people. And 18 plus is 1 person. And my last bit is 3 to 6. Oops. And 3 to 6 is 5 people. Okay, so now I'm going to do the visualization of the data. Excuse me. So I'm going to highlight here, and I'm going to do insert, and I'm going to do this as, I'm just going to do this as a bar chart again. I'm going to go from the bottom. So I'm going to click this, and it's showing me. So so we noticed that on average, most people don't use most of our respondents did not use Facebook. But those who did, the average amount of the people who did use Facebook used it approximately 3 to 6 times per week. Now notice here that I did not have, it has a chart title here. I can double click in here and change this. So Facebook use in time. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. Number of times Facebook is used in 1 week. Okay. So you're going to want to make sure that your graphs are labeled like this, so that way your audience knows what they're looking at. Okay. But the same goes here to, much like the last time I was showing you, you can do save as picture, and so that way you could put something like this in your paper as a visualization of your data. Those would be found probably in the appendix, although some of you may choose to put small versions of them in your paper proper, near your results section where you're talking about the data. Okay. I'm going to kind of leave this here. It's already been almost an hour of me talking at you, or maybe closer to a half an hour if you guys listen to me on double time on YouTube. But this should give you sort of a good idea of how you can sort of play with your data, what you should do to sort of clean up your data and sort of understand what you're seeing. Like I say, there's several things like you can take off of your video. There are other things that you can sort of take away from this, or like you can compare data together or look at 2 data sets together to try and understand if there are trends, etc. So if you guys have additional questions about how this works or anything like that, you can feel free to email me, and we can go from there. Okay. So I suppose with that, I will let you go, and I hope you're all well. Like I say, email me if you have questions, and we'll chat soon, I'm sure. All right. Bye.